Hey guys, some gamer dude here. When you're making a game, I believe you need time to play it, get a good understanding of the game, what does work, what doesn't work, and more importantly, why. Not just playing the initial set, but what the game will evolve into over that initial block. So sets and cards can be adjusted for the best play experience. Just because you made a game doesn't mean you understand it. These are mutually exclusive concepts. You also want as many of the intrinsic components of the game as possible to function and be appealing, so people can appreciate the full scope of it. This is where we get to the topic of today. I don't believe Bushiroad's staff understood the original Vanguard very well. A core aspect of Vanguard is the triggers. It's one of the most iconic aspects of the game. Critical draw and heal triggers function perfectly with normal gameplay. They don't really have any drawbacks. They don't cause you to play abnormally, and are nothing but a benefit. With the exception of heals shouldn't help the winner win more, they don't need to be understood, let alone supported. They are very simple concepts. This isn't true of the fourth trigger, the stand trigger. The stand trigger seems simple on face value. Stand a rearguard, give a unit plus 5000 power. Pressure your opponent's hand to win the game with more attacks. In some ways, it sounds inherently superior to critical triggers. It takes more individual cards to stop than a critical trigger, but this isn't the case. Once everything surrounding them is considered, they have issues. Considerable issues. To get the full potential of a stand trigger, you need a rearguard with a minimum of 11,000 power natively, so it can attack a Vanguard at 2 stages with both its boost and with the plus 5,000 power of the stand trigger, pushing a 10,000 shield out each time, steadily draining your opponent's hand of high quality shields. Then, when they have to spend 2 5,000 shields, all shields. Then, it needs to be able to attack before the Vanguard does. Going backwards, why guard this rearguard? It literally does nothing negative to the defending player but the 1 damage, which can be a positive thanks to defensive triggers. Less shielding for the duration of the turn. If that rearguard goes after a rearguard itself, it's just a 5,000 shield loss instead of the potential 10,000, unless they really need that rearguard. It actually gets worse with the Vanguard. The Vanguard is normally the attack with the most pressure per turn thanks to critical triggers and twin drive. Remove one of those components, the Vanguard really doesn't do anything either. It's just another attack that deals 1 damage and can have the same upside for the defending player in a defensive trigger. Until the circumstances become dire, it's in the defending player's best interest to just let defensive triggers do their work and accumulate cards in hand. Meanwhile, if that defending player is using critical triggers, like most players will, they've been accelerating damage all game. The final issue here is that your Vanguard is like this all game. No pressure. From the moment you start attacking, your Vanguard feels neutered. The reason I say that Bushiroad didn't and doesn't understand Vanguard very well is because every issue with stand triggers is solved with cards, making the appropriate cards to make stand triggers viable. Bushiroad would go on to give stand triggers broken effects during G in an effort to get people to play them, then consequently replace them in the V reboot when they had to restrict and ban stand triggers for the broken effects during G. They just couldn't get the majority to play them natively. Here's the thing. Solving stand triggers isn't hard, not in the slightest. But first, we need to understand what we're trying to do here, as you can use stand triggers in 2 ways. The first is what I assume to be the original intention behind stand triggers, the mixing of both offensive triggers. These decks aren't actually without precedent, they were just never prominent. During Block 3, both Jewel Knights Reverse and Silverthorns ran mixed triggered decks. I want to draw attention as to why. This was well into the era of archetypes, designed for power creep to combat the perceived mistake of cross rides. Most every archetype had a grade 2 capable of reaching 12,000 via an organic passive effect, usually the Vanguard being of the same archetype. These cards were a prime candidate for stand triggers. But not only this, both of these decks had very easy access to either a burst of pluses or a constant stream of them. They didn't actually need draw triggers. There is a certain point in Vanguard where you gain so many pluses through effects that draw triggers become superfluous, and it isn't even that many. Draw triggers are not that consistent and don't give you that many additional cards per game. They're more beneficial for decks that don't otherwise gain cards. Finally, both Silverthorn and Jewel Knights lacked a finisher to close out the game. They were just stagnant. but consistent. Stand triggers gave them this finishing power. Transplanting this knowledge back to day one, the thing that hits me is just how bad the early sets of Vanguard are. Let's look at a few clans in the original block. Like Nova Grappler, Oracle Think Tank was left in a really weird state day one. It had 2 draws, a heal, and a critical. It was virtually unplayable like this, but what it does have is a great potential for stands. It has the potential for more cards and pressure in Maiden of Libra and Apollon. Oracle Think Tank has Battle System Mocha, an incredibly easy to achieve 11,000 beta. CEO Amaterasu is a great card and can actually be utilised to plan out your attack patterns. Stand coming up, maybe Mocha doesn't need a boost. Set 2 and Oracle Think Tank gets more cool stuff. It gets a second critical, a stand trigger, and Luckbird to draw a card with a soul cost. Even if she's not good now, Scarlet Witch Coco will be good. You could totally make that mixed trigger deck here for Oracle Think Tank. Except you wouldn't want to. Silent Tom exists. Silent Tom is commonly considered to be the card research and development had to tiptoe around for a long time, believed to be the only thing that kept Oracle Think Tank relevant, but at the same time was too good and stopped them from getting really good support. It's also likely the reason why Genesis exists. But I'm not too concerned about that right now. What I want to focus on is his effect promoting the hamming of critical triggers for an easy win. He caused a situation where both he and the Vanguard said to the opponent, perfect guard to stop. The opponent only has 4 of those. The only reason you'd not play Silent Tom is that you don't have Silent Tom. He is a better finisher than our mixed deck strategy. Let's move to Royal Paladin. Royal Paladin, having a theme of tutoring units, is a plus. It seems like it would lend itself to stands for similar reasons to Oracle Think Tank, but it isn't so. It's actually for more reasons than you'd think too. In BTO1, your only choice of an 11,000 beta was Covenant Knight Randolph. He's a pretty bad card. Boost by Little Sage Marin to reach 16,000 without an effect. Hopefully after your Vanguard attacks, you have more cards in hand than your opponent and it can swing for 16,000 with a stand trigger. The problem here is that you have no control over Randolph. Not like Mocha, where 4 cards in hand is easy to achieve. Your opponent can interfere with Randolph easily by playing out how and what they guard. Randolph is just too inconsistent to be reliable. In conjunction with this, pluses in Royal Paladin at the time, pretty much just Alfred, is too expensive. You can realistically only get one use out of it. It's not like Royals wasn't pushing for a mixed deck. It had Barkle, which forced Flogel into your deck. Barkle is a worthless +2. Flogel and Lou are not boost material. That turns into a net 0 and a +1 with Alfred early when it's released. Barkle will get restricted from being the starting Vanguard anyway due to another card. Royals enter a similar position to Oracle Think Tank. You could run stand triggers, but why would you? BTO2 gives them a finisher in Soul Saver Dragon, which at a cost of Soul Blast 5 gives your front row plus 5,000 each. This is finishing power at the time, rendering stands superfluous. We have a built-in effect that drains your opponent's hand of 2 cards minimum per column. Further to this, in BTO3 we have Palamedes and Toy Poogle, who help give us these numbers natively, and as far as 26,000 with Soul Saver Dragon. There is a definite argument for a mixed deck here. Akane and Alfred give just enough pluses over a game to make draw triggers superfluous. Grade 2 Palamedes is not hard to achieve. The deck can go RVR and adapt to whatever triggers it gets. It's just that it's more beneficial to play to that 21,000 3-stage magic number Palamedes reaches with Marin by hamming criticals. 21,000 natively wants criticals. Rather surprisingly, one of the clans I actually think suits stand triggers in the initial block is Shadow Paladin. Shadow Paladin is interesting in that its actual gimmick of sacking your guys for plus 10,000 power, plus 1 critical is absolute garbage and not worth the investment. Neither is the persona for the same effect on the cross-ride worth it for that matter. But what Shadow Paladin does have in its favour is bulk due to cross-ride, a 12,000 beta in Masquerade, speed in Garurabao, and a fair few cheap +1s in both Maha and Nevin. It just lacks finishing power, which is where stand triggers come in. It's not like PBO was an amazing deck back in its day, but it is an ideal space for stand triggers. Another clan I'd like to touch on is Granblue. Granblue wasn't given a draw trigger at all. Instead it was given 2 criticals and a stand. Due to the English release order, I've never actually paid attention to the original Granblue. But honestly, it's by and far one of the better decks of the original era. Bazcoat gets you Soul. Ruin Shade gives you an 11,000 beater and a way to fuel the discard pile. Dancing Cutlass utilizes that Soul to give you pluses. Then turn Dancing Cutlass into Captain Nightmist or Samurai Spirit so it's actually useful. If you're really desperate for a plus, Negro Mole can do that. Granblue is surprisingly complete for a deck of this era, arguably more complete than a chunk of the clans till Block 3, including 3/4 of Team Asteroid. Let's touch on Nova Grappler for a bit. Both BTO1 and the anime spread this idea that Nova Grappler wants to use stand triggers. It couldn't be any further from the truth. Asura Kaiser, more so with the Death Army couple, turned Grade 3 into stand triggers, more or less. So you're running them without running them. You don't need more. Nova Grappler wants to get to a position where those 4th attacks have impact and fast. Despite being able to run draw triggers and Magician Go Carrara, Nova isn't built for a grind game and can't accelerate damage without chance. Asura Kaiser is better suited to an RVR pattern on Grade 3, allowing for criticals to close that damage gap than having Asura Kaiser and the Death Army couple to close out the game. Stern Blaukluger wants all criticals all day anyway, and the rest of Nova Grappler at this point is really trashy. Yes, even Gold Rutile. As much as we want to live the dream of stands in Nova Grappler, I'm not terribly certain it was ever a good choice. The clan, as strange as it sounds, wasn't built for stand triggers. Most of the game just can't use stand triggers. Rainbow is too inconsistent for an offensive force. Stand triggers aren't really effective till pressure for game is on. Most things aren't made to play to a grind game or have the components they need. Other things don't want them because whatever game plan they have just doesn't work with them or squanders their best attributes. The only other clans that could use stands that I didn't talk about are Neo Nectar and Dimension Police. The latter due to Rain and DP's odd gimmick causing an RRV pattern. In Block 2, Asia Circuit, not much changes, but we are introduced to Aqua Force, the premier stand trigger deck. So let's shift gears and talk about the only clan in Vanguard designed for stand triggers. Aqua Force, a clan that initially promoted only the use of stand triggers. Aqua Force is a clan based on precise attack patterns. The cards have their effects triggered on certain attack counts, later called waves. It's also something of a complete joke to start with. It just doesn't function on release. The turn starts with Storm Rider Basil, and our first problem. When he attacks, if he's first, he gets plus 2,000 power and swaps to the back row afterwards, allowing the card behind to attack and artificially increase the attack count per turn. With his plus 2,000 power, he reaches 10,000, in a meta where Crossride exists and 11,000 base is steadily becoming the norm. He also has to attack the Vanguard to get this effect. He's basically unplayable and literally so come BT10, just 2 sets after his initial release, where 11,000 becomes the norm. So to have this attack do anything, we need a grade 3 with the same effect, Diamantes, to take his place. Then things get strange. A vital component is missing, and all other components are fighting for attacks they simply can't have. Coral Assault is our 11,000 beta, but wants to be the 3rd attack. Maelstrom wants to be 4th, as do Valeria and Algos. Even if we replace Coral Assault with a 2nd Maelstrom, making your board harder to form, you still have multiple cards fighting over attack 4. It's actually for the best to give up on Valeria and Algos. Let the column just be whatever for 16,000, then allow Coral Assault to be 11,000 on attack 3. Aqua Force as a whole looks like a bunch of ideas that simply don't work, yet have a ton of promise. The only cards that function well till Block 3 are Maelstrom himself, Diamantes, and Dorothea, but they can't hold up the deck. What is interesting is, by BT13, Aqua Force functions perfectly fine, the way they should have always functioned. I'm not talking about Tidal Assault either. Despite being very big on Aqua Force, it's one of my top 3 clans. I've never liked this card because it wastes attacks and puts a worthless card in the front row for the duration of the turn. The plus 5,000 cost has always been too detrimental in my opinion. I've always felt that it is a lazy and inefficient way to play Aqua Force. To me, it's not enough to enable that 4th attack and unlock later wave skills. Each attack must have impact. It must have forward momentum, otherwise you must as well play anything else. Who I feel the real star of BT13 was is Wheel Assault. For CB1 on a boost, he switches the places of two of your rearguard. In BT11, Aqua Force got Twin Strike Brave Shooter, a 12,000 beta of 2 or less of your rearguard arrested, a perfect first attacker, and Titan of the Beam Rifle, an 11,000 essentially conditionless follow-up. Aqua Force could finally play to its full potential. Each attack could matter. It only took 5 sets to happen, all because Basil wasn't given a CB cost to justify a functional power level. Aqua Force would have been perfectly fine with Coral Assault had Basil functioned as it needed to. All of that aside, why does Aqua Force work with stand triggers? Because it's not natively chance burst or pressure reliant. It just does it. It does help that Maelstrom swings are +1 for you and a -1 for your opponent, pushing harder into your opponent's resources and giving you more survivability, but it's not the main point here. It's locked behind Limit Break 4. Chances are, it's happening a total of once. Aqua Force makes up for the lack of criticals and doing nothing early game by closing the damage gap mid-game to late game with more base attacks. Stands just increase it even further. If a defensive trigger is hit, going after a rearguard still reduces your opponent's resources. Eventually, the pressure of all the attacks is too much when it is close to or at game. More base attacks without strings attached is the support stand triggers needed. This is due to each player drawing 3 cards per turn. Due to during each turn each player draws 3 cards, stands end up a lot like kill-based decks. You need to do a ton of killing for it to have an impact. One here, one there, doesn't add up much. It helps decks achieve victory, but isn't a game plan itself until it's turned up to 11. Like the Big Bang deck from the Legion era, turning up killing to 11, Aqua Force turns up attacks to 11. The deck makes it a game plan. I think it's unreasonable to expect every clan to be capable of pulling something off like Aqua Force. Expecting stand-only decks in every clan was simply never going to happen. Aqua Force, maybe Nova Grappler and Pale Moon, had they been made correctly, would have been the only places where this could have happened. What I don't think is unreasonable is to expect stand triggers to be somewhat viable in all clans. How could have this been achieved? As I said in my review, a good 7 of the 15 clans are unplayable in Block 1, and there is no quick fix to any of them. Early Vanguard sets are really bad in terms of design. Decks were obviously missing components, or just flawed in concept. Stronger coherence and consistent design across the board, as what was seen during the Link Joker block, is the answer. The game needed an overhaul and a restart for stands to be viable. It's no coincidence that decks that could actually use stand triggers didn't come around till the Link Joker block. The story of stand triggers is a cautionary one. I believe a lot of people were turned off stand triggers by the Link Joker block because of the bad impression they gave during the initial and Asia Circuit blocks. It took 3 blocks, 10 main sets, and 6 extra sets for stand triggers to become viable. But the damage had been done. Damage that could have been averted had the design team better understood Vanguard as a game. I for one think it's a real shame how things turned out, because I really like stand triggers. I think they have a place in the game and make decks a bit more interesting. They just needed their own homes. This has been Some Gamer Dude, and thanks for watching.